Caroline Crouch had always been a girl who believed in fairy tales. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of Athens, she had dreams that glittered brighter than the Mediterranean sun. She was smart, charming, the kind of person who made strangers feel like old friends in minutes. And then she met him. It started like a storybook romance, the kind people whispered about but rarely saw in real life. A handsome young man, calm, composed, with a smile that seemed to promise safety. They laughed together in the cafes of the city, shared night walks along empty streets lit by amber lamps, and spoke about a future full of adventure and freedom. He made her feel like she belonged in a world larger than her own. Caroline fell fast completely, and soon the couple eloped, exchanging vows far from the prying eyes of family and friends. At first, life was perfect. Their small apartment smelled of fresh flowers and home-cooked meals. He seemed devoted, almost too devoted, always anticipating her needs, always watching for her smile. Friends would comment on how lucky she was, how she had found a man who seemed too good to be true. And maybe that was the warning Caroline ignored. The first hints of something darker came in whispers, small moments she dismissed as quirks or accidents. The way he would check her phone when she wasn't looking. The way he would casually comment on her plans before she even mentioned them, as if he knew. Caroline laughed it off at first, telling herself that love sometimes came with little eccentricities. But then the subtle changes started creeping in. The apartment that had once been warm and inviting began to feel cold. Small things went missing or were moved around, and he would act confused when she noticed. He would brush it off with a charming shrug, an easy smile, and Caroline, trusting him, let it slide. The tension was invisible to outsiders, but Caroline felt it in the pit of her stomach. Nights became restless. She woke up to find him sitting silently, staring at her in the dark, eyes too steady, too calculated. She tried to convince herself it was paranoia. Love demanded trust, she told herself, and she trusted him completely. Friends began to notice her withdrawal. Caroline stopped attending family gatherings, avoided calls, and seemed increasingly fragile. He was always nearby, hovering just enough to offer comfort, always ready with a kind word, a soothing gesture. But behind that calm exterior there was a shadow no one else could see. Caroline felt it, though she didn't know what to call it. Something was off, and it terrified her. The nights were the worst. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the occasional clink of a glass or the soft ticking of the clock. Caroline would lie awake, feeling the weight of his gaze on her, a feeling that made her skin crawl. But each morning he would wake her with a smile, breakfast in bed, the way he always had, and the tension would melt. She wanted to believe the best, to cling to the storybook version of her life. Then came the day that changed everything, though Caroline didn't realize it yet. She found herself alone in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, and noticed the small things she had ignored for months. The receipts for expensive items she had no memory of buying, messages on her phone that weren't hers, or had been deleted before she could read them. A strange file on the computer labeled in a way she didn't recognize. Caroline's unease grew into fear, a creeping sense that something was fundamentally wrong. She tried to talk to him about it, subtly at first, dropping questions into conversation, watching his reaction. His answers were smooth, rehearsed, like a play he had performed 1,000 times before. He smiled, reassuring her, dismissing her concerns, and Caroline, trusting the man she loved, let the unease slip back into the shadows of her mind. Even then, there were cracks that no charm could cover. The neighbors noticed how he sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation. Caroline caught him watching her from across the room with a calculating stare that made her skin crawl. She wanted to leave, to escape the invisible cage forming around her, but the thought of breaking the delicate balance terrified her. She didn't know how deep the darkness ran, how quickly the facade could shatter. By the time Caroline realized the danger, it was already too late. What had started as subtle manipulation, small disturbances, had grown into a pattern she could no longer ignore. But the true horror, the moment that would shatter the story of her life, was still waiting in the shadows. It was coming for her, slow, silent, inevitable, and Caroline, trusting him, would never see it coming. As the city moved outside her window, oblivious to the brewing storm, Caroline remained unaware that her life, the one she had built with hope and love, was about to be stolen from her forever. The calm, devoted husband, the man she had promised everything to, hid a darkness that no one could have imagined. And when the storm hit, it would leave no trace, no warning, only the haunting silence of a story gone terribly wrong. The days that followed were ordinary in every outward way, but the ordinary had begun to feel like a trap. Caroline moved through her routines mechanically, laughing at the right moments, answering questions with practiced ease, all while a quiet dread festered beneath her skin. She still didn't know why, but something inside her screamed that nothing was as it seemed. Her husband's calmness became suffocating. He always seemed to know where she was, what she was doing, who she was speaking to. At first, Caroline had dismissed it as attentiveness, as love. But now, late at night, when the apartment was still, the gaze that once felt protective now felt predatory. She began noticing patterns she hadn't seen before, phone calls he couldn't explain, sudden trips with vague excuses, friends disappearing from their lives without warning. Then the first real incident happened. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but Caroline felt it like a punch to the stomach. She went to check the mail and found a package addressed to him, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, there were documents, photographs, notes written in a precise, clinical hand. They were about her, her routines, her friends, her family, the places she visited. Fear clutched at her chest, cold and relentless. She confronted him quietly that evening, trying to appear casual. His response was that faint, reassuring smile she had learned to trust, but the flicker in his eyes was gone, replaced with something sharp, calculating, almost amused. Caroline began noticing other things too. Objects moved in ways she couldn't explain, strange shadows in the apartment. The sound of doors opening and closing when no one was there, and always that watching. She tried to tell herself she was imagining it, that the stress of young married life was playing tricks on her mind. But deep down she knew. One evening she came home to find the apartment darker than usual, the curtains drawn tight. Her husband greeted her with a smile, holding a cup of tea, calm as ever. But Caroline noticed the way he lingered in the doorway, eyes sharp, assessing. She tried to sit and relax, but the unease in her chest grew heavier. Something had shifted. The safety she had once felt in his presence was gone. She wanted to run, to leave, but the thought of the confrontation, the explanation, terrified her. And then it happened. It was quiet at first. Caroline noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, and then nothing. The lights flickered, shadows danced on the walls, and a strange silence settled over the apartment. She turned to speak to him, to break the tension, and the apartment felt like a cage. In an instant, the mask he wore cracked, and the truth revealed itself in the most horrifying way. He was not the man she had married, the devotion, the charm, the calm exterior. It was all a carefully constructed lie. The man standing in the kitchen, looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach twist, was a predator who had waited for the perfect moment. Caroline realized too late that every small disturbance, every unexplained detail, had been leading up to this. She tried to move, to escape, but the apartment had become a labyrinth with no exits. The violence was swift and merciless. It wasn't chaotic, it was precise, controlled, deliberate. Every move calculated to silence her before anyone could ever understand what had happened. Caroline's life ended in a blur of terror and disbelief, the man she trusted more than anyone in the world becoming the instrument of her death. Outside, the streets of Athens were alive with normalcy, completely unaware that inside a small apartment, a nightmare had been executed with chilling perfection. Her body left no immediate signs of struggle, no evidence that could easily be traced. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But the darkness didn't end there. While her husband resumed his life, pretending, smiling, interacting with friends and neighbors as though nothing had happened, the investigation became an obsession. Detectives pored over every detail, every fragment of evidence, each one painting a picture more disturbing than the last. Caroline's life, once vibrant and full of promise, had been systematically dismantled by the man she had trusted completely. The charming husband, the smiling partner, the devoted lover. He was gone, replaced by a calculating predator who had hidden in plain sight. The breakthrough came from the smallest of clues, something almost invisible, something most people would have overlooked. A traffic camera caught his car parked near the park late at night, far beyond the route he had claimed to be taking. Financial records showed transactions linked to storage units he hadn't mentioned. Even his friends began noticing inconsistencies, tiny slips of truth he hadn't noticed he revealed. Each clue added a stroke to the portrait of a man who had planned Caroline's life and her death with terrifying precision. Detectives reconstructed the timeline. Caroline's final hours were mapped out in chilling detail. He had lured her into a sense of normalcy, using routines and familiarity like a trap. Every smile, every comforting gesture, every touch calculated to disarm her, to keep her unsuspecting until the moment he struck. He had chosen a method that left little trace, relying on his meticulous planning and knowledge of her habits. The reality was almost unbelievable. How could someone appear so devoted and loving while orchestrating murder? The arrest came quietly. He didn't resist, didn't protest, his face calm, almost eerily composed, but his eyes betrayed the truth, cold and unyielding. As the detectives read him his rights, the full weight of his deception became clear. The man who had smiled at neighbors, shared jokes with friends, and held Caroline in his arms had spent years manipulating everyone around him. He had controlled her, isolated her, and in the end destroyed her. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with emotion. Friends and family sat in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the man before them with the husband they had known. Evidence poured in: texts, receipts, hidden recordings, forensic reports, all detailing a calculated path of betrayal and murder. Each revelation hit like a hammer, leaving a deep scar on everyone who had loved Caroline. Even as the trial unfolded, the darkness lingered. People struggled to understand how trust could be weaponized so completely, how a life could be erased without leaving immediate trace. The details were almost cinematic, each discovery more horrifying than the last. Every calculated step, every lie, every moment of manipulation, painted a portrait of evil hiding behind a familiar face. But there was a sense of justice, small and quiet, in the way the